This was a horrific crime. To be able to do that to someone would require some level of anger and hatred towards this individual.
It's more easy to assume that a man is probably perhaps more capable of committing this kind of savagery. And so talk with the female who may be an unwitting ride-along and see if she might crack.
Keep walking, stop.
What happened in the house? Who's covered?
She describes him as being homicidal, and she describes herself as just basically being gripped with fear as this is all unfolding.
I don't get scared much, but looking at you, I scared.
She claims she becomes kind of a victim in this thing. He did the exact same thing. He started to point more toward her as being the problem. He said she's the one that wanted to murder. She was the mastermind.
If you make the comment of taking her out, I was still kind of like in panic mode and trying not to panic.
Both people are clearly involved, but, you know, how much of what he says is the truth, how much of what she says is the truth.
I love you, babe. Love you too.
It was a toxic combination that was fueled by sex and power and a desire to live a freestyle life at the expense of another human being.
Why? Why was someone so mad at her?
On the evening of January 4th, 2022, police in Tulsa, Oklahoma receive a call from a worried employee at a towing company after 29-year-old Sarah McGuire misses her shift.
She was very reliable in showing up. She had consistent shifts that she was working, and so when her supervisor realized that she's not here today, that obviously set off alarm bells.
She's calling and asking the police department, hey, can you do a welfare check? And this is just not like her. So the police are called out.
They were looking through windows, trying to see if they could see anyone. They were able to see kind of through a hole in the blinds. There was someone on the couch. They were covered up with a blanket.
Obviously, at that point, it's like, yeah, we need to get in there. Something maybe amiss here. Maybe she's ill. Maybe she's sick.
They noticed that the front door is locked.
And so law enforcement breach the window and get through and unlock the door.
When the police department make it inside the home, they go into the room where they've seen what they believe is a person laying there on the couch. Almost the entire portion of that person's body is covered by a blanket. That blanket towards the head has blood on it. When they remove that blanket, they see this woman with gash marks and blood all over her face. Blood matted in her hair. The injuries were quite severe.
It was quite obvious in this scene that she was dead. When we're dealing with a body, even if we know who's supposed to be living there, we just don't make the assumption that the victim is then that person, especially in this case where severe damage was done to the face and everything. So we'll use secondary, and that could be anything from scars, marks, tattoos. In this case, there were some very distinguishable tattoos.
Police took some photographs of some of her tattoos and were able to find out family members' information, contact information. They were able to confirm that that was Sarah McGuire. This was a horrific crime. To be able to do that to someone would require some level of anger and hatred towards this individual. Why did Sarah have to die?
Sarah Elizabeth McGuire grew up in the small town of Apache, Oklahoma.
We grew up a farm family, my mom, my dad, and there were 4 of us kids. I was the oldest. My sister Lindsay was next, and then my sister Sarah, and then our little brother Seth. My parents worked a lot, so we grew up a tight-knit group of siblings. My parents got divorced whenever I was 15, so Sarah would have been 10 and a half, 11. And my dad ended up remarrying 2 years later.
In 2007, 3 years after her father remarried, Sarah decided she needed a change.
Sarah moved to Tulsa in her sophomore year of high school. My mom, Kim, and my sister Lindsay already lived in Tulsa. Sarah had still been living with my dad and stepmother. She decided she wanted to move with our mom, so we moved her up there. It was a really good transition for her.
After high school, Sarah struggled to choose her next steps, but she eventually landed a job where she was thriving.
She was working for Speedy's Towing in Tulsa, Catoosa area, and she was the office manager there. Sarah was the central hub of that workplace. Sarah had such a all-encompassing love and protective nature for people, family, friends. She was one of those people that could be friends with anybody.
We met at a mutual friend's house, and then we just started hanging out, like, all the time. She was really bubbly, funny, charismatic. She would do anything for anyone. If she saw somebody that wanted money, she would give them the last dollar that she had to make sure that they had something.
At this point in her life, she was doing so well. She had a full-time job. She was flourishing.
She was doing great. She was super excited about the things that she was pursuing in life and where she was going. And we were all proud of that.
A lot of the murders here in Tulsa are shootings, some stabbings. This was way more than that.
It was obvious that the cause of death was some type of blunt trauma injury to her head. There's blood spatter on the walls, on the ceiling.
They can see on the blanket that there's a fairly sizable pool of blood, at least on the blanket itself. Underneath the couch, kind of on the floor, there's an even larger pool of blood. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door had been locked. There was some food left on the counter, some pork chops that a couple had been eaten off of. There was some mac and cheese. The circumstances of the home suggested whoever did this had some kind of connection to Sarah. They knew her in some way.
This isn't a scene where somebody came in there who was a stranger to Sarah. You have some sense that whoever was in that house had permission to be in the house and took some care to secure the house when they left. You know, it didn't look like any signs of a struggle. It looked like just an ambush. Why would she be killed in such a manner? The next logical question is, where's her wallet or her purse? Where are her credit cards? You know, is anything here that should be here?
She didn't have her wallet there. Even her phone was gone. No credit cards.
Based on the severity of the violence, detectives know the motive isn't as simple as a robbery gone wrong.
When you look at her injuries, clearly this was fueled by some emotion and some anger or jealousy towards Sarah.
There's no doubt it's personal. There is passion, there is hate, there is aggression.
As detectives continue processing the scene, they collect a crucial piece of evidence.
You have this wrecking bar sitting neatly right on top of a dresser, just conspicuously laying there. Obviously looks like it's been cleaned up or washed up.
To have the crowbar sitting there, right there in the room, just really a couple feet away from Sarah. On seeing those injuries to her face, I think it's a very reasonable and logical conclusion to make that this is more than likely the weapon that was used.
While forensic investigators document the scene, detectives take their search outside the home.
We will canvass the area to see if anybody saw anything unusual, any kind of cars in the neighborhood or anything like that.
Nothing really stood out to any neighbors that would lead them to think that something this horrific had happened just a couple houses away. In speaking with neighbors, officers had learned that Sarah had a white Dodge Charger.
She drives this 2012 white Charger, and it's not where she parks. Let's get the tag. Let's get a good description on that Charger. And then let's be on the lookout as possibly stolen cars, so that if you're in law enforcement and you run across this type of car with an Oklahoma tag, we're looking for it.
And so, do we have someone associated with this killing on the run? Time is of the essence.
Coming up, Sarah's family alerts police to a troubling relationship in her past.
It became more and more toxic. It was a really bad situation.
And investigators track down Sarah's stolen car.
He actually saw the Charger sitting in the parking lot.
They see there's two people sleeping in it, a male and a female.
Hours into the murder investigation of 29-year-old Sarah McGuire, Tulsa police are desperate for any clues into who might have beaten her to death inside her own home.
So the logical step, obviously, is you got to reach out to family, give them a death notification, and then have a very hard conversation with them right at the exact same time.
That personal contact is one of the first places we're always going to look. Who does she associate with? Who has she had problems with?
My mom called me. She lives in Bartlesville, and she was wailing like nothing I've ever heard before. She said, "There's cops at my house. Tulsa cops." She said, something happened to Sarah. And she just said, "Sarah's dead." I just felt like my whole world stopped. I never, in my wildest dreams, imagined that anything like this could have ever happened to Sarah.
This family was in shock. They wanted justice for their sister, their daughter.
Tulsa police, as they're speaking with Sarah's family, trying to figure out who she knows, who might have been in her home, they learned Sarah had been in an on and off again relationship with a man named Walter Spradlin.
Sarah began dating Walter, I would say probably 6 years ago. They started off seeming to be a very good relationship. As the relationship progressed, it became more and more toxic, and I know drugs were involved. And Sarah, this is where her loving nature became a flaw. Our family told her that several times, that you can't fix everybody. You can't fix him, and you can't make this right. You have to take care of yourself. And she didn't see it like that. Sarah and Walter had broken up officially. I believe maybe a year and a half they had been apart.
That would be definitely something we'd want to go and check and talk to Walter.
So they go out and find him and talk with him.
They let him know what had happened to Sarah. I think from his reaction, he was pretty surprised to hear the news.
When we do an investigation like this and we go and we talk to an ex-boyfriend, we want them to tell us where they were, what they were doing, what kind of relationship they had with the person.
He told those officers, "I haven't been with her. I've been home with my family."
Walter denied having any involvement with this case and said that he was home with his mother at the time.
Detectives immediately follow up with Walter's mother to verify his alibi.
His mother confirmed that he had been at the home with her all night and hadn't left. Other family was able to confirm that, and ultimately he was ruled out as a suspect.
After eliminating Walter, detectives reach back out to Sarah's family about her missing credit cards.
Detectives asked her family, "Can you try and contact the bank and see if you can figure out if any of her information has been used to try to purchase anything?"
My mom and Sarah had a joint account. In case Sarah ever needed money, my mom would just put money into that account. And somebody was trying to use Sarah's debit card.
The family eagerly tells detectives that Sarah's card is still in use and moving quickly.
They clearly spotted a trail moving through Oklahoma, up into Missouri a little bit, and then back into Arkansas. They had stopped in a Walmart and took money from the ATM card, did Cash App purchases, did several things.
And that's a huge lead to the case because it gives you a location and a timeline. It's literally like little breadcrumbs left along a path.
As detectives review the activity, they're notified of a new charge from a few minutes earlier.
The last purchase they made was online food order at Whataburger in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So we contacted the Fayetteville Police Department.
They say, hey, we have a homicide that took place in Tulsa. We're looking for a 2012 white Charger.
So they asked some of our patrol officers just to kind of go to the area and see if maybe they couldn't locate the vehicle.
At around 11 a.m., Fayetteville police arrive on the scene of the Whataburger restaurant.
The first officer that got there was one of our motor officers who rides a motorcycle. And so as he pulled in to the area, he actually saw the Charger sitting in the parking lot.
It's still sitting in the parking lot, so now they know, all right, we better get on this. So then the Fayetteville Police Department brings more officers to that location and surround the car.
You're totally surrounded and there's nowhere to go.
It's been less than 24 hours since Sarah McGuire was found brutally murdered. And police have located her stolen car in Fayetteville, Arkansas, more than 100 miles away.
What Fayetteville knows right now is that this is a vehicle that's stolen. It's associated with a homicide, so the Fayetteville Police Department is going to take every precaution.
So once they had a really good plan in place, they started approaching the vehicle.
As they're approaching that vehicle, they see there's two people sleeping in it, a male and a female.
Officer, there's a white Dodge Charger in the Whataburger parking lot. Sit up, put your hands up. Let me see your hands. You're totally surrounded and there's nowhere to go. Stand up, face away from me.
Put your hands on top of your head, interlace your fingers, and don't look towards me.
Back seat passenger, exit the vehicle, stand up and face away.
Patrol officers called them out of the vehicle. They pretty much just followed every command that they were given and just got out of the car.
Keep walking, keep walking, keep walking, stop.
Once officers are able to extract these individuals from the car, they're trying to find out identifying information. They ask them, what are your names? And they voluntarily offer to them, one of the individuals is Nicholas Johnson, and then the other is Brentley Denison.
In a case like this where they find the suspects in the victim's vehicle, which has been identified as being stolen, they have enough probable cause to make an arrest.
I love you, babe. Love you too.
So Fayetteville Police Department take them to their police station.
After they were taken into custody, we essentially treated the vehicle like a crime scene. It was secured and towed to a secure lot here at our police department. We contacted Tulsa, let them know that they were under arrest. They told us that they had two detectives that were already on the way.
So Tulsa Police Department, TPD, gets over to Fayetteville to find out what, if anything, they know about the death of Sarah.
They decide to interview Brentley Denison first. Maybe they thought, hey, let's rule her out as maybe a possible victim in this scenario.
It's more easy to assume that a man is perhaps more capable of committing this kind of savagery. And so talk with the female who may be an unwitting ride along and see if she might crack.
We're homicide investigators, and we're here to talk to you about the car you guys were in.
She starts talking about, I knew Sarah, she's a friend of mine.
How did you guys meet?
One of my friends. Walter. He's my best friend.
Brinley explains that she and Sarah shared a mutual connection through Sarah's ex-boyfriend, Walter Spradlin.
It was learned that Walter introduced Brinley to Sarah.
Brinley was looking for a place to stay at that time, and Sarah offered up a place for her to stay. She offered up a shed that was in her backyard.
It was fairly small, it almost looked like a work shed.
How long have you been staying over there?
Probably 2 weeks. I don't know, maybe 3. Yeah.
Did you spend a lot of time in the house as well?
Yeah.
So she treated you right. She was good to you.
Yeah.
So a big question is, why did something like this happen?
To determine exactly what happened to Sarah and why, detectives switch gears and ask Brinley about her connection to Nick.
So how do you know Nick?
I've known him for like a while.
When you say for a while?
Like years and years.
Brinley tells detectives that she's lived in Tulsa her entire life.
Brinley was born in Tulsa, 1996. Childhood was pretty normal. Mom, dad, sister. When me and her mom got a divorce, I think it had a big effect on her. She's 13, 14, and I'm at work. You know, she kind of is able to run wild. And then she gets pregnant in her senior year, drops out of school.
After her son was born, Brinley obtained her GED and went to beauty school.
She did graduate from the beauty school. She could have had a career in hair, but Brinley was, you know, hanging out with the wrong people. And it just went downhill from there.
She was a heavy partier and all that. She had been in trouble with the law on several other occasions. She had a drug past.
Brinley was not working unless you want to say stealing from people is working. It was almost like a high for her. So Brinley was in jail for theft, and we get her out. She comes to my house. But the first night that I worked, she left and we never saw her again.
She was in between homes, didn't really have anywhere else to go. So Sarah offered Brinley a place to live. Brinley had told detectives in her interview that, you know, she had been in this on-again, off-again relationship with Nicholas Johnson.
Brinley surprises detectives when she explains that Nick is married with children.
Nicholas kind of has a similar storyline to tell about, you know, growing up in kind of a fractured home.
He was born here in Tulsa. Nick grew up staying with his dad, but they would bounce around from wherever they could have a place to stay.
In July 2012, a 19-year-old Nick met his future wife, Stacy, while helping family members move into a new home.
I had rented this out to them, and that is how I met Nick. From day one, we've been inseparable. Several months later, we got married, and I ended up getting pregnant on our first kid. Now we have 5 girls and 1 boy.
When Nick met Brinley in 2019, however, he soon began staying away from home more often.
He had a drug problem, and he was doing, you know, good with it. But I thought that maybe we got back into it.
He was very similar to Brinley in that he was involved in drugs, couldn't hold a job, was doing some kind of like part-time house remodeling.
After collecting details about their suspects, detectives ask Brinley about the last time she saw Sarah McGuire, but she suddenly becomes uncooperative.
And how did you guys get the car?
Yeah, I'm a little worried about it.
She initially plays stupid, like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Ultimately, as they continued to press her and ask her questions about what happened, she gave them her version or her story of events.
This is important. We didn't come all the way from Tulsa to talk to you about a stolen car, and you probably know that.
Already.
Okay. What happened in the house? Just tell me why. Who got so mad at her? Why was someone so mad at her?
There's me over there.
Brinley starts describing this story, and I certainly would call it a story because it's from her perspective to protect her skin.
"25-year-old Brinley Denison has started opening up to authorities about her complicated relationship with murder victim, 29-year-old Sarah McGuire."
Brinley had been living there for, I think, a couple of weeks or so, and they had begun to engage in a romantic relationship.
She'd always say, she ain't gay. I'm like, I ain't gay either, We're both good guys or whatever. And she was just different. She was all I wanted. Everybody knew that. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that.
But Brinley had also been in an on-again, off-again relationship with Nicholas Johnson. And kind of where her relationship with Sarah began versus where that relationship with Nicholas ended is a bit murky.
Last time we talked, I broke up with him. There was a huge fall down.
And you knew you were staying over with Sarah?
Yeah.
So the night of the murder, Brinley tells Tulsa police detectives that she and Sarah were hanging out in that main house area. Sarah had cooked her dinner, and then Nicholas Johnson shows up.
I didn't know he was coming.
Nicholas was in love with Brinley. He was going there to hopefully make up with Brinley.
Who invited him in the house?
Sarah did.
So when he came in, was it friendly?
Yeah.
Was it friendly for a while?
Yeah.
So where did it go from?
When did it go?
Where did it go bad?
The pictures.
Brinley says Nicholas had seen some photographs of Brinley and Sarah, maybe some scantily clad photographs that really upset him.
Were the pictures sexual in nature?
Yeah.
How did the pictures get seen?
They were in the room, and he went back there.
And so he saw these pictures, and did he think that that was a problem between you and him?
Yeah, he knows.
Maybe he pissed at you or pissed at her?
Both. I don't get scared much, but look at these eyes scared.
She describes him as being homicidal in that he's in such a rage that he's going to kill Sarah. And so she flees to this back bedroom of Sarah's house, and she can just hear the homicide taking place, and she describes herself as just being gripped with fear as this is all unfolding.
Less than 10 seconds, but it felt like forever.
She getting hit with?
The crowbar.
Sarah was laying on her couch. It doesn't give me any indication that she may have even been conscious at the time the first blow was delivered to her.
Brinley tells detectives the night's horrors were far from over.
So did you guys leave right then and there? Or did you...
No. He forced himself on me first.
She claimed after he beat her, he then grabbed Brinley and took her into the bedroom and raped her. So now she becomes kind of a victim in this thing.
Brinley told detectives that the plan was that they would travel to Arkansas, to Devil's Den. And along the way, they needed to dump the clothes, get rid of some of this physical evidence that might be tying them to the murder. During this whole time, Brinley is telling detectives she was in fear for her life, and she was essentially hostage with Nicholas as he was doing all of these things. All of this behavior that happened while they're on the road, the multiple stops that were made, being left alone in the vehicle multiple times, that really stood out to detectives as this isn't adding up with your version of events. There were multiple times where, if Brinley wanted to leave, she could have left. So detectives went to go talk to Nicholas Johnson, see what he would tell them.
We know Sarah's dead. You know Sarah's dead. You were there when Sarah died. and you were in Sarah's car.
Well, what happened?
That you killed Sarah.
I didn't kill Sarah.
This is your God-given opportunity that we are here right now to talk to you about why things took place. There's 2 sides, 3 sides to every story, okay?
Surprisingly, he decided he wanted to start talking.
Did she piss you off? Did she say something? Did she steal from you?
No, it was more over love.
Over love over who?
Brinley.
Detectives are speaking with Nicholas Johnson after his ex-girlfriend Brinley Denison implicated him in the murder of Sarah McGuire.
Once Nick breaks down and acknowledges his involvement, Nick describes how it appears to him that the relationship that he had with Brinley was compromised because of his discovery of Brinley having some relationship with Sarah.
Sarah was trying to put a wedge between me and Brinley.
Did that make you jealous?
A little bit.
But contrary to what Brinley is describing about Nick's rage, he doesn't describe it as rage. His focus is he's trying to figure out how to rebuild the relationship with Brinley, a person that he's professing his love for.
He tells them, I went over there to try and talk with Brinley, see if we could work things out.
Her and Brinley were arguing. Or having some sort of debate. I don't know what it was. It was like, when I come in, it was tension was kind of high.
Nicholas tells detectives that he and Brinley stepped outside so she could get some air.
What was decided between you and Brinley?
That we was, she was glad and happy to see me, and that we was going to try to move forward in our relationship.
When the couple came back inside, Nicholas says Sarah was asleep on the couch.
Apparently, what Brinley tells me is she don't like Sarah either. Somehow we got on the topic of stealing her car and all that stuff. We was just going to take off, and then Brinley was make the comment of taking her out.
He and Brinley have this conversation of he's gonna kill Sarah, killing Sarah and stealing her stuff. And so ultimately that's what they decide to do.
Were you angry at Sarah when all this stuff went down because of the love you felt for Brinley?
Yeah, because initially I had felt like the issues that we were having, that Sarah had caused it.
Who went and got the weapon?
It was already in the house, there in the kitchen.
So who picked up the crowbar first?
Brinley had it, she came into the living room with it.
Brinley, according to Nick, is the one that actually hands him the wrecking bar and says, do it. If you want the relationship, then Sarah's the problem. Sarah needs to go.
And I was talking to Brinley, and honestly, after that, I really kind of just blacked out on it, like just kind of zoned out on the whole thing.
Nick tells police officers that after he beats Sarah, he and Brinley go to have sex, but this is consensual. And while this is going on, he's still able to hear Sarah in the background, making noises, kind of moving around.
The sick, twisted details of the two of them having sex in the victim's bed, admitting to being able to hear the victim struggling to live. If that doesn't give you chills and make you mad and angry, I don't know what does.
So, what did you guys take from the house when you guys left?
I didn't take anything personally. I was still kind of like in panic mode and trying not to panic. And she was going through stuff in the bedroom and putting stuff in the bags that we had, that she had made up, her purse and another bag that had some clothes in it.
How about her credit cards? Do you know where her credit cards are?
Brinley had all those. She was the one that she was more with the brains with the credit cards and stuff like that.
Nicholas did the exact same thing as Brinley. He started to point more towards Brinley as being the problem. She talked him into it. She's the one that wanted to murder Sarah. She's the one that wanted to take the car and the money and all that. She was the mastermind.
So the detectives are now trying to figure out, can we prove one or both of these stories?
Coming up, as prosecutors prepare for trial, evidence continues to mount against both suspects. But will it be enough to convict?
The defense had argued that we didn't have sufficient evidence.
Her case was remanded back to the preliminary hearing stage.
I was very disappointed. The questions started flooding in about why, just why.
Less than 30 hours into the murder investigation of Sarah McGuire, Brinley Denison and Nicholas Johnson have both told Tulsa police their version of what happened in the savage crime.
Brinley's version is she's the held hostage rape victim. Nick's version is she's the mastermind behind the idea of killing Sarah and was a willing participant. Both people are clearly involved, but, you know, how much of what Nick says is the truth, how much of what Brinley says is the truth.
When detectives analyze the couple's electronic trail following the murder, they discover that Brinley and Nicholas were caught on camera at one of their many stops.
It's obvious from some of the receipts that we are able to recover that Nick, he's obviously savvy enough from his life on the streets to know that he can take a phone, and did that to Walmart and was able to sell that phone to acquire some cash.
Tulsa police were able to recover some surveillance footage showing they did stop at a Walmart.
We see that Nick had actually gone into the Walmart by himself to do this transaction. She remained in the car, and that kind of debunked the whole kidnapping. She would have had a chance to run away and flee and everything.
I believe he was in there for about 20 minutes, and in that point in time, she's in a public place. There are a number of individuals who she could have sought help from. She was not this victim that she tried to paint herself out to be.
When authorities dive deeper into Brinley and Nicholas's backgrounds, it only further supports the idea that Brinley was a lot more involved than she was letting on.
Nick's rap sheet doesn't jump out at you as anything remarkable. I mean, I think the most he had was maybe some prior possession of drugs, but you look at Brinley, and it's a rap sheet that just doesn't stop.
There was some, possession of drugs, some theft either of a credit card or unauthorized use of a credit card.
One of the things that stood out was she was involved in a vehicle theft, and it was an armed, vehicle theft. Here's somebody who is claiming that she was a victim, and yet her track record suggests that she's a whole lot more savvy with the criminal justice system than Nick was. She's not a victim in this case.
Brinley claims that she and Sarah were in a relationship, but outside of Brinley's statements, there was really not much that we could say, yes, that's true, or no, that's not. I do not believe any photograph of Brinley and Sarah was ever recovered.
On January 6th, Brinley Denison and Nicholas Johnson are both charged with first-degree murder and extradited to Tulsa, Oklahoma to stand trial.
I was so grateful that they had been found, and then just the questions started flooding in about why, just why.
My reaction to hearing the news of Brinley was shock more than anything. I couldn't believe it. It's definitely not the way she was raised.
Faced with a mountain of evidence, Nicholas Johnson decides to plead guilty to the charges.
Prosecutors were going to file the bill of particulars, which means seeking the death penalty against these two, and Nicholas decides to blind plead, basically meaning I'm going to plead guilty without a deal from prosecution. So the judge is up to him to sentence him to whatever he sees fit.
So he enters a blind plea to the crime of murder in the first degree and a blind plea to the crime of possession of a stolen vehicle.
He did that in May, and by July he was sentenced to life without parole and sent to prison.
The case against Brinley Denison is more complicated.
The defense had argued that based on the evidence, we didn't have sufficient evidence to prove that she was a principal in the death of Sarah. And the court bought off on that argument.
Her case was remanded back to the preliminary hearing stage, and they had a hearing where Nicholas testified. After that, the judge ruled that there wasn't enough evidence to show that she had committed the crime of first-degree murder.
So once first-degree murder is off the table for Brinley, she pleads guilty to accessory to murder and gets sent to prison for 20 years.
As far as Brinley's sentence, I was very disappointed.
I don't think justice was served. Personally, I think that they should have been given the death penalty.
Sarah's never going to be back. Sarah's never going to be able to hug her mom or her family members or sisters. These two had a very sick relationship. And I think independently we wouldn't have seen this, but the two of them acting together was a toxic combination that was fueled by drugs and sex and power.
They conspired to kill her, to steal her belongings, steal her credit cards, steal her phone, and ultimately see, what all can we get away with. I think that Sarah would still be here today if it weren't for the both of them coming together.
Sarah was only 29, and she had so much potential, so much drive that was just taken for no reason whatsoever.
I want people to remember Sarah for how big of a heart that she had. I felt it in my own life and the things she would do for me, and hearing stories from other people of the things she would do and how she would help them. She would always help somebody in need. I mourn the life that she should have had, and I want people to remember how amazing she was.
The man who pulled off the only unsolved airline hijacking in American history did not wear a mask. He did not shout. He did not fire a weapon. He did not leave behind a manifesto. He simply boarded a routine flight, smiled at a flight attendant, lit a cigarette, ordered a bourbon and soda, and quietly informed the crew that he was carrying a bomb. Less than 5 hours later, he disappeared into a storm-black sky with $200,000 strapped to his body. More than half a century has passed. Thousands of suspects have been investigated. Millions of pages have been reviewed. Yet the question remains frozen in time, haunting the halls of the FBI and captivating generations of investigators. Who was the man who called himself D.B. Cooper? November 24th, 1971. Thanksgiving Eve. Airports across the United States were crowded with families eager to reunite before the holiday. Business travelers rushed through terminals, briefcases in hand, while airline employees expected another busy but ordinary evening. At Portland International Airport, nothing appeared unusual as passengers lined up to board Northwest Orient Flight 305, a short hop from Portland, Oregon, to Seattle, Washington. The flight was expected to last barely 30 minutes. Among the passengers stood a middle-aged man dressed in a dark business suit. He wore a crisp white shirt, a narrow black tie secured with a simple tie clip, and a dark raincoat. His polished loafers reflected the terminal lights. He carried only a black attaché case and a brown paper bag. Witnesses would later describe him as calm, polite, and remarkably ordinary. He looked like an accountant finishing a business trip, or perhaps a salesman heading home before Thanksgiving dinner. Nothing about him demanded attention. He purchased a one-way ticket under the name Dan Cooper. The ticket cost just $20. There were no identification requirements for domestic airline passengers in 1971. No metal detectors guarded the gates. No baggage scanners searched for explosives. A traveler could walk onto an aircraft with little more than a boarding pass and a smile. The aviation world belonged to a different era, one built on trust rather than suspicion. Cooper took seat 18C near the rear of the Boeing 727. He removed his raincoat, settled comfortably into his seat, and lit a Raleigh cigarette. Smoking was permitted aboard commercial flights, and clouds of tobacco smoke drifted lazily through the cabin. A flight attendant named Florence Schaffner approached him shortly after takeoff, expecting nothing more than a routine drink order. "Bourbon and soda," he requested. His voice was soft, measured, almost forgettable. As she handed him the drink, Cooper slipped her a folded note. Schaffner barely looked at it. Flight attendants received phone numbers from lonely businessmen so frequently that she assumed this was another attempt at flirting. Without unfolding the paper, she slipped it into her purse and turned away. Then Cooper leaned slightly toward her. "Miss," he said quietly, "you better look at that note." His expression never changed. No panique, no anger, only certainty. Schaffner unfolded the paper. The message was handwritten in neat block letters. "I have a bomb in my briefcase." Time seemed to stop. She looked back at the man. He nodded calmly. "There is no point being frightened," he reportedly told her. "Sit beside me." Every instinct urged her to run. Instead, she obeyed. Cooper opened the attaché case just enough for her to glimpse its contents. Inside were 8 red cylinders connected by insulated wires to what appeared to be a battery. Whether the device was genuine has never been conclusively determined. It did not matter. To Schaffner, it looked terrifyingly real. The hijacking had begun. Yet nothing inside the passenger cabin suggested catastrophe. Children laughed several rows ahead. Businessmen continued reading newspapers. Someone asked for another cocktail. The aircraft cruised peacefully above the Pacific Northwest, while only a handful of people understood that every life aboard had suddenly become hostage to a stranger with impossible demands. Cooper spoke without raising his voice. He wanted exactly $200,000 in cash. He specified $20 bills. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 primary parachutes, 2 reserve parachutes. Finally, he instructed that a fuel truck be waiting upon arrival in Seattle, so the aircraft could depart immediately after his demands were met. The instructions were relayed to the cockpit. Captain William Scott listened in stunned silence. He had flown countless commercial routes. Nothing in his experience resembled this moment. Rather than resisting, the crew followed established procedures. The safety of passengers came first. Air traffic control was notified. The Federal Bureau of Investigation received word. Local police mobilized. Executives at Northwest Orient Airlines were pulled into emergency meetings. Within minutes, an ordinary domestic flight had transformed into a national crisis unfolding in real time. Authorities faced an impossible calculation. Was the bomb genuine? Would the hijacker begin killing passengers if negotiations stalled? Should they attempt to deceive him? Or comply completely? The decision came quickly. Lives outweighed money. The ransom would be paid. Meanwhile, Cooper remained astonishingly composed. He sipped his bourbon, lit another cigarette, occasionally looked through the window. Witnesses later recalled that he never appeared nervous. His breathing remained steady. His movements were deliberate. He did not rant about politics or religion. He issued no grand speeches against the government. He demanded no publicity. It was business. Nothing more. Perhaps that was the most disturbing detail. Violence often announces itself with chaos. Cooper brought only silence. As the Boeing circled above Seattle, authorities needed time to gather the ransom and parachutes. Air traffic controllers invented excuses for delay, telling Cooper that congestion at the airport prevented an immediate landing. He accepted the explanation without argument. For nearly 2 hours, the aircraft remained in the sky. Inside the cabin, passengers noticed little beyond an unusually long flight. Some wondered whether weather had delayed their arrival. Others joked about missing Thanksgiving plans. Only the flight crew understood the unbearable tension building minute by minute. On the ground, FBI agents scrambled to assemble the ransom. Bank employees worked furiously to collect 10,000 unmarked $20 bills. Every single bill was photographed before delivery. Each serial number was meticulously recorded. Investigators hoped that if the hijacker escaped, eventually someone would spend the money. A cashier, a bank teller, a merchant. Someone would notice. Someone would unknowingly expose him. Those serial numbers became one of the largest financial tracking operations in American criminal history. At Seattle-Tacoma Airport, emergency crews cleared the runway. Police vehicles hid beyond sight. Snipers searched for possible firing positions, but received strict orders not to provoke the hijacker. No one knew whether a single gunshot might trigger an explosion inside the aircraft. As darkness settled over western Washington, rain swept across the airport. Wind gusts battered the runway. Visibility worsened. It was the kind of weather most pilots preferred to avoid. For Cooper, it would become an ally. Flight 305 finally touched down shortly after 5:45 p.m. The cabin remained eerily calm. Passengers believed they had merely experienced an unexpected delay. Outside, however, hundreds of law enforcement officers watched from concealed positions. The aircraft rolled to a designated section of the tarmac. Engines continued running. No dramatic confrontation followed. No heavily armed assault team stormed the cabin. Instead, a lone airline employee approached, carrying a canvas bag filled with cash. Nearby were the 4 parachutes Cooper had demanded. Everything proceeded exactly as instructed. Florence Schaffner carried the ransom aboard. Cooper examined the money carefully. He appeared satisfied. Then he gave an order that surprised everyone. He released every passenger. One by one, unaware they had narrowly escaped one of the most extraordinary crimes in American history, 36 passengers walked down the staircase into the cold Seattle night. Many smiled with relief, believing only that mechanical problems had delayed their trip. Few realized they had spent hours seated beside one of the most elusive criminals the world would ever know. Inside the nearly empty aircraft, the atmosphere changed instantly. The hijacking was entering a far more dangerous phase. Only the flight crew remained. Only they would witness what happened next. And only one man knew that the Real escape had not even begun. The cabin door closed behind the last passenger with a dull metallic thud. The sound echoed to the nearly empty Boeing 727, like the closing of a vault. The chatter, the movement, the ordinary distractions of commercial travel disappeared in an instant. What remained was silence, broken only by the low vibration of 3 Pratt & Whitney engines idling on the rain-soaked tarmac at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Dan Cooper had exactly what he wanted. $200,000. For parachutes. A nearly empty airplane. Most hijackers sought publicity. Some demanded political asylum. Others wanted prisoners released or governments embarrassed. Cooper wanted none of it. He had never asked for television cameras. He had never requested a statement be broadcast to the nation. There were no ideological slogans, no revolutionary speeches, no threats beyond the one necessary to control the aircraft. His objective had always been something else. To disappear. Outside, federal agents watched through binoculars, unable to predict his next move. Every decision carried enormous risk. If they attempted to storm the aircraft, the bomb might be detonated. If they allowed him to leave, they could lose him forever. The standoff entered its most critical stage. Cooper called flight attendant Tina Mucklow to his seat. Unlike the terrified Florence Schaffner earlier that afternoon, Mucklow found herself alone with a man who seemed almost unnaturally calm. His voice remained steady. His breathing never changed. Even after hours of negotiations, there were no signs of panic or fatigue. He unfolded a map. His finger traced a route across the Pacific Northwest. He instructed Captain William Scott to fly toward Mexico City. Not directly. There would be conditions. The aircraft must remain below 10,000 feet. The landing gear would stay extended. The wing flaps were to remain partially lowered. The speed could not exceed approximately 200 knots. The cabin would remain unpressurized. These were not random instructions. Each one suggested an intimate understanding of the Boeing 727 and its performance characteristics. The pilots exchanged uneasy glances. Flying a commercial jet under those conditions for such a long distance would consume enormous amounts of fuel. The aircraft simply could not reach Mexico. They explained the limitation. Cooper listened carefully. No argument. No visible frustration. He accepted that a refueling stop would be necessary. Reno, Nevada was selected. Again, his response was immediate. Fine. One word. Nothing more. The professionalism unsettled everyone aboard. This was not a desperate criminal improvising under pressure. This was someone following a plan. Before departure, Cooper made another unexpected request. He wanted the cabin lights turned off after takeoff. Only minimal cockpit lighting. Darkness would become another layer of protection. The less anyone could see, the harder it would be to follow him. As mechanics completed refueling beneath sheets of cold November rain, another battle unfolded far above the airport. Military commanders had already ordered fighter aircraft into position. The hijacker could not simply be allowed to vanish. Yet the mission presented extraordinary difficulties. The Boeing 727 would fly unusually slow. Most military jets were designed for speeds many times faster. Keeping formation without revealing their presence would prove extraordinarily difficult. Nevertheless, aircraft launched into the night. They would attempt a shadow flight 305 without Cooper ever knowing. At 7:40 p.m., the engines roared back to life. The Boeing rolled down the runway. Rain streaked across the windows. The city lights of Seattle faded into darkness. Inside the cabin, Cooper appeared almost relaxed. He loosened his black tie, removed his suit jacket. The neat businessman from Portland was quietly transforming into someone prepared for a leap into the unknown. Tina Mucklow remained nearby. She later remembered how strangely polite he seemed. He thanked her, used respectful language, never raised his voice. There was no hatred in his eyes, no visible excitement, only concentration. At one point, he handed her money and suggested she buy herself dinner after everything was over. The remark sounded surreal. A hijacker discussing restaurant plans. A man carrying what appeared to be a bomb, worrying about a stranger's evening meal. It was another contradiction in a case filled with contradictions. As the aircraft settled into cruise altitude, Cooper instructed Mucklow to enter the cockpit. Close the door. Remain there. No one was to come back unless he specifically requested it. She hesitated. He nodded reassuringly. It's okay. Those would become some of the last words anyone unquestionably heard from a man calling himself Dan Cooper. The cockpit door locked. From that moment forward, no eyewitness could describe exactly what happened inside the passenger cabin. Only sounds, movements, and a handful of instrument readings. Captain Scott focused on maintaining the unusual flight profile. The aircraft lumbered southward through turbulent weather. Outside, the Pacific Northwest had become a sea of black clouds. Heavy rain slammed against the fuselage. Wind buffeted the wings. Temperatures at altitude hovered well below freezing. It was an environment few experienced parachutists would willingly choose. Yet somewhere behind the cockpit, a man appeared to be preparing for exactly that. The crew heard occasional movement. Metal striking metal. Perhaps equipment being shifted. Perhaps parachute harnesses being adjusted. No one could be certain. Military aircraft struggled to maintain visual contact. An Air Force fighter occasionally caught sight of the Boeing's navigation lights before losing them again inside thick cloud cover. Another aircraft flew above. Another below. Neither pilot reported seeing anyone leave the airplane. Visibility was simply too poor. Inside the cockpit, another concern emerged. The Boeing 727 possessed one feature unlike almost every other commercial airliner of its era: a ventral aft staircase, built into the tail. It could be lowered during flight. The design had originally been intended for passenger boarding at airports lacking proper facilities. To Cooper, it represented something else entirely: an escape hatch. Around 8 p.m., a warning indicator illuminated inside the cockpit. The aft stairs had been activated. Captain Scott informed Cooper through the intercom that lowering them during flight could be dangerous. The response came quickly: "I know what I'm doing." Again, the words carried no emotion, just confidence. A few minutes later, another unusual event occurred. The aircraft's tail suddenly pitched upward, then downward. The crew felt a noticeable pressure change. Not violent, not catastrophic, but unmistakable. The pilots immediately recognized that something significant had happened somewhere behind them. One theory flashed through every mind: someone had jumped. Yet no one dared leave the cockpit. The instructions had been absolute. Around 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the dense forests of southwestern Washington, the aircraft experienced a sudden upward movement, an oscillation later described as consistent with substantial weight leaving the rear staircase. The exact location remains uncertain. The exact second remains debated. But investigators have long considered this moment the most likely point at which Cooper vanished into the storm. Imagine the conditions: night, driving rain, wind approaching hurricane force around the aircraft, temperatures below freezing, no moonlight, no visible horizon. Beneath him stretched endless forests, rivers, mountains, and rugged terrain. Even experienced military parachutists would have considered such a jump extraordinarily hazardous. Cooper wore a business suit, a raincoat, loafers. He carried a canvas bag containing $200,000 in bundled cash. Nothing about the scenario suggested survival. And yet, no body was ever found. No parachute. No clothing. No confirmed human remains. Nothing. The Boeing continued toward Reno exactly as instructed. No communication came from the passenger cabin. No further demands. Only silence. When the aircraft finally landed shortly after 10 p.m., armed FBI agents surrounded it within seconds. Floodlights illuminated every inch of the fuselage. Officers rushed aboard expecting confrontation. Instead, they found an empty cabin, rows of vacant seats, discarded cigarette butts, a black clip-on tie lying on one of the seats, several strands of hair, 2 unused parachutes, an open rear staircase. Dan Cooper had simply disappeared into history. The first moments after Flight 305 landed in Reno should have brought answers. Instead, they created more questions. At approximately 10:15 p.m. on November 24th, 1971, the Boeing 727 came to a stop under the bright lights of Reno Tahoe International Airport. FBI agents surrounded the aircraft from every direction. Weapons were ready. Officers expected a violent confrontation. They expected to find a desperate criminal trapped inside, perhaps holding the remaining crew hostage, perhaps preparing one final threat. But when the aircraft door opened, there was nothing. No gunfire. No explosion. No hostage situation. Only silence. The passenger cabin looked almost ordinary, except for one impossible detail. The man who had hijacked the plane was gone. The FBI entered the aircraft expecting to find evidence of a carefully planned escape. Instead, they discovered the strange remains of a disappearance. The cabin contained clues, but not answers. The hijacker had left behind enough evidence to prove he existed, yet somehow almost nothing that could reveal who he truly was. On one of the seats, investigators found a black JC Penney clip-on tie. Nearby was a tie clip. Cigarette butts rested in the ashtray. The ransom money was gone. The parachute was gone. The man was gone. It was as if someone had walked into the night and erased every trace of himself. The FBI immediately launched one of the largest manhunts in American history. The case received a code name, Norjack, short for Northwest Hijacking. Hundreds of agents were assigned. Thousands of interviews began. The investigation stretched across multiple states. Every detail mattered. Every possibility had to be considered. The first question was obvious. Did D.B. Cooper survive the jump? At first, many investigators believed the answer was no. The circumstances appeared almost impossible. The weather was brutal. The terrain below was unforgiving. The equipment was inadequate. Cooper had jumped without proper clothing, without visible survival gear, and without a modern parachute designed for precision landing. He did not know the exact location where he would land. He did not know what obstacles waited beneath the clouds. He did not know whether the parachute would open correctly. Yet the absence of a body created a problem. Criminal investigations depend on evidence. A dead suspect would have explained everything. A recovered parachute would have answered critical questions. A discarded ransom bag would have narrowed the search. But none of those things appeared. The mystery only grew. Investigators began reconstructing Cooper's final hours aboard the aircraft. They examined his behavior, his language, his knowledge, the way he controlled the situation. Slowly, a different image emerged. This was not simply a reckless criminal gambling with his life. This was someone who appeared prepared, someone who understood aviation, someone who had thought carefully about the escape. The instructions he gave the pilots became a central focus. Cooper knew the Boeing 727. He knew about the rear staircase. He knew that the aircraft could fly slowly with the landing gear down and flaps partially extended. He knew that a jump from the rear stairs would be possible. The FBI began asking a critical question. Was he connected to aviation? Perhaps a pilot. A former military member. An aircraft mechanic. Someone who had studied the aircraft professionally. The investigation expanded. Agents searched military records. They questioned aviation workers. They examined reports of missing persons. They investigated anyone who matched the description. The description itself became one of the biggest challenges, because almost everything about Cooper was vague. Witnesses described him as a white male, approximately mid-40s, around 6 feet tall, medium build, dark hair, wearing a business suit. But thousands of men fit that description. The sketch released to the public became one of the most recognizable criminal composites in American history. A serious expression, sharp features, dark sunglasses, a narrow face, a man who looked ordinary enough to disappear into any crowd. That may have been his greatest advantage. He did not look like a criminal. He looked like someone people trusted. The FBI soon discovered another mystery. The name D.B. Cooper itself was probably not his real identity. The ticket had been purchased under the name Dan Cooper. Why the newspapers later called him DB remains unclear. The error became permanent. A mistake transformed into a legend. The name spread across America. DB. Cooper became more than a suspect. He became a symbol. A ghost. A man who had defeated the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. But behind the legend was a serious investigation. Agents began tracing every possible lead. They checked missing persons databases. They searched criminal histories. They interviewed people who claimed to know him. They followed rumors from across the country. Some reports came from people hoping for attention. Others came from individuals convinced they had discovered the truth. Most leads collapsed, but some were intriguing. One early theory suggested Cooper might have been a former paratrooper. The FBI examined whether his military experience explained his confidence. A trained jumper would understand parachutes. A trained jumper would understand wind conditions. A trained jumper might believe survival was possible. However, no military record ever conclusively identified him. Another theory suggested he may have been a professional criminal with experience in planning escapes. But again, evidence remained elusive. The investigation faced a unique problem. Most criminals leave a trail. They make mistakes. They contact accomplices. They spend stolen money. They return to familiar places. Cooper appeared to do none of those things. If he survived, he vanished completely. The ransom money became the most important physical evidence. $200,000. 10,000 $20 bills. Every serial number recorded. The FBI distributed those numbers nationwide. Banks were alerted. Businesses were warned. Agents waited for money to appear. But months passed. Then years. Nothing. No major purchase. No suspicious deposit. No desperate attempt to exchange the bills. The money simply disappeared with the man who carried it. The FBI considered another possibility. Perhaps Cooper did not survive. Perhaps the money was buried somewhere deep in the wilderness. Perhaps the aircraft's tail movement was not caused by a successful jump, but by an accident. A man lost in darkness. A parachute never properly opened. A body hidden beneath miles of forest. The Pacific Northwest was vast. The Columbia River Basin alone covered thousands of square miles. Dense forests could hide a person for decades. Rivers could carry away evidence. Animals could scatter remains. Nature itself could become the perfect accomplice. But without proof, investigators were trapped between two impossible conclusions. Either D.B. Cooper survived and disappeared, or he died and disappeared. Both possibilities created the same haunting reality. The mystery remained. As months turned into years, the case became something unlike any other investigation the FBI had ever handled. A crime with a beginning. A crime with a clear timeline. A crime with witnesses. A crime with physical evidence. But no ending. The world knew exactly what happened on the airplane. They knew what Cooper demanded. They knew how he escaped. They knew the moment he stepped into the darkness. But they did not know what happened after. And that single unanswered question would transform a Thanksgiving night hijacking into one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Because somewhere between the clouds above Washington and the forest below, D.B. Cooper vanished. For the FBI, the disappearance of D.B. Cooper was not just another unsolved crime. It was a direct challenge. A hijacker had taken control of a commercial aircraft, demanded a ransom, escaped through the night sky, and left behind almost no trace. The case had everything investigators feared: a dangerous criminal, a national security concern, and a mystery that refused to die. The Bureau had solved thousands of crimes. They had tracked fugitives across continents. They had uncovered hidden identities. But this case was different. Cooper had not fled by car. He had not crossed the border. He had not hidden in a crowded city. He had simply stepped into the darkness and disappeared. The search area became the next great obstacle. Investigators believe Cooper likely jumped somewhere over southwestern Washington state, near the area surrounding the Columbia River and the town of Ariel, but the exact location remained uncertain. The aircraft had been moving. The wind was unpredictable. The storm was intense. A person jumping from an airplane at night could have landed miles away from the estimated location. The FBI had to search a wilderness that seemed almost endless. The landscape below was a maze of thick forests, steep hills, rivers, and isolated roads. This was not a place where evidence waited to be found. It was a place where evidence disappeared. In December 1971, investigators began one of the largest ground searches ever conducted for an aviation criminal. Agents, military personnel, and local law enforcement officers entered the forests. They walked through mud. They climbed hills. They searched beneath trees. They examined abandoned structures. Every fallen branch. Every piece of fabric. Every object buried in the soil could have been the clue that finally solved the mystery. But winter in the Pacific Northwest was unforgiving. Rain turned trails into rivers of mud. Cold temperatures slowed the search. The forest swallowed sound. Even helicopters struggled to cover the enormous area. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Still nothing. No parachute. No body. No money. No evidence confirming whether Cooper had survived. The silence became almost as mysterious as the crime itself. Then investigators began focusing on the parachutes. Cooper had demanded for parachutes for a very specific reason. He wanted authorities to believe he could not be certain whether any parachute had been tampered with. By requesting multiple parachutes, he prevented the possibility of law enforcement secretly providing a defective or unusable one. It was a clever move. But investigators later discovered something even more interesting. Not all of the parachutes provided to Cooper were equal. 2 were military-style parachutes. One was a reserve chute. Another was a training parachute that had been intentionally disabled. The FBI believed Cooper selected one of the usable parachutes. But there was a possibility that he had unknowingly taken the wrong one. If so, survival would have been almost impossible. The discovery raised a terrifying question. Did Cooper know enough about parachutes to identify the correct equipment? Or had he made a fatal mistake? Experts examined his actions carefully. A trained parachutist would normally understand the difference between a main chute and a reserve chute. A professional would likely inspect the equipment before jumping. But Cooper had limited time. The aircraft was moving. The cabin was dark. The weather was worsening. Even an experienced jumper could make a mistake under those conditions. Yet some investigators remained convinced that Cooper had military experience. They pointed to his confidence, his knowledge of the aircraft, his ability to negotiate, his understanding of what equipment he needed. He did not behave like someone making an impulsive escape. He behaved like someone who believed he had done this before. The question was, where did he learn? One of the earliest suspects investigated was a man named Kenneth Christensen. Years later, Christensen became one of the most famous names connected to the Cooper mystery. He had worked for Northwest Orient Airlines. He was a former paratrooper. He knew aviation. And according to some people who knew him, he possessed a strange amount of cash after the hijacking. His physical appearance also attracted attention. Some believed he resembled the FBI sketch. The theory gained popularity. A former airline employee. A man with parachuting experience. a person who understood the Boeing 727. The possibilities seemed compelling. But investigations require evidence. And evidence against Christensen never reached the level needed to confirm him as Cooper. The money was never found. No confession was ever verified. No direct connection to the hijacking was proven. Like dozens of other suspects, Christensen became another unanswered question. And the list continued growing. Over the years, hundreds of people claimed they knew the true identity of D.B. Cooper. Some were serious. Some were mistaken. Some simply wanted attention. Every new name created a wave of excitement. Every theory promised the possibility of finally closing the case. But each one eventually collapsed. The FBI had another problem. The legend of D.B. Cooper was growing faster than the investigation. The public became fascinated with the idea of a man who had successfully escaped from the authorities. Newspapers published stories. Books were written. Documentaries were produced. The hijacker became almost mythical. To some, he was a criminal, a dangerous man who threatened innocent lives. To others, he became a symbol of rebellion, a mysterious figure who outsmarted the system. The reality was far more complicated. 36 passengers had been placed in danger. A flight crew had endured hours of uncertainty. A bomb threat had forced an entire airline into crisis. But the mystery surrounding Cooper created a strange cultural fascination. America had never seen anything like it. As the years passed, the FBI continued receiving thousands of tips. People reported neighbors, co-workers, family members, strangers they saw in restaurants. Almost anyone could become a suspect. The Bureau followed every credible lead. But the truth remained hidden. Then came one of the strangest developments in the entire case. A small discovery decades later would challenge the belief that Cooper had either disappeared forever or died immediately after jumping. It involved a child playing near the Columbia River, a discovery beneath the sand, and a piece of evidence that carried the same numbers investigators had been searching for since 1971. For more than 40 years, the Cooper case had survived on theories, on rumors, on unanswered questions. But suddenly, investigators had something physical, something real, something that suggested the mystery might not be as impossible as everyone believed. Because buried along the banks of the Columbia River, a fragment of the missing ransom had been found, and it would reopen one of America's greatest unsolved cases. For decades, the name D.B. Cooper existed in a strange place between reality and legend. He was not a fictional character. He was not a myth created by Hollywood. He was a real man who boarded a real airplane, threatened real people, and vanished into a real storm. But as the years passed, the absence of answers transformed the case into something almost impossible to separate from folklore. The FBI continued investigating. The public continued searching. And every new theory carried the same haunting question. Did D.B. Cooper survive that night? For years, many investigators believed the answer was no. The odds seemed overwhelming. A man jumping from a Boeing 727 at night, wearing business clothes, carrying a heavy bag of money, with no visible survival equipment, during a violent storm, into an unknown wilderness. It sounded like a death sentence. But then, on February 10th, 1980, a discovery along the Columbia River changed everything. A young boy named Brian Ingram was spending a family vacation near the banks of the river at Tina Bar, southwest of Vancouver, Washington. It was an ordinary afternoon. A child digging in the sand. A family enjoying time outdoors. No one expected that beneath the surface of the beach lay a piece of one of America's greatest mysteries. As Brian moved through the sand, he uncovered something unusual. A bundle of decayed paper. At first, it looked like nothing more than old trash. But when the family examined the discovery, they realized the truth. It was money. Old money. Damaged by years underground. 3 bundles of $20 bills. The paper was fragile. The ink was faded. But investigators quickly confirmed something extraordinary. The serial numbers matched the ransom money given to D.B. Cooper. The impossible had happened. A piece of the hijacking had returned. After nearly 9 years of silence, the case had a new clue. The discovery immediately changed the investigation. The money was real. The ransom had entered the environment. The question was no longer only whether Cooper had survived. Now investigators had to ask, how did the money reach Tina Bar? Was Cooper's landing zone closer than previously believed? Did he survive the jump and later lose the cash? Or did the money somehow travel miles through rivers and underground channels after his death? The discovery created more mysteries than it solved. The FBI examined the bills carefully. The condition was important. The bundles were severely deteriorated. The rubber bands holding them together had disappeared. The paper had suffered from exposure. But strangely, not all of the money from the ransom appeared. Only $5,800 had been found. A tiny fraction of the $200,000 Cooper carried. Where was the rest? If Cooper had survived and spent the money, why were these bundles buried? If he had died, why had only a small portion appeared? The answers remained hidden. The location of the discovery became one of the biggest controversies in the entire case. Tina Bar was not where investigators originally expected Cooper to land. It was far from the estimated flight path. This created a complicated puzzle. The FBI had calculated that Cooper likely jumped somewhere near the area of Ariel, Washington. But Tina Bar was several miles away. Could the money have moved? Could it have been carried by the Columbia River? Could it have traveled through underground channels? Scientists and investigators debated the possibilities for years. The Columbia River is powerful. Its currents can transport objects over great distances. But the exact journey of the money remained unclear. The discovery also renewed public interest. After nearly a decade, D.B. Cooper returned to national headlines. Newspapers that had once covered the hijacking reopened the story. Television programs revisited the mystery. Amateur investigators began searching for answers. Everyone wanted to know one thing. Was this proof that Cooper had survived? The FBI remained cautious. Finding the money did not prove survival. It only proved that some of the ransom had reached that location. The possibility remained that Cooper had died during the jump and that the money eventually moved through natural forces. But another possibility became harder to ignore. Maybe Cooper had survived. Maybe he walked away. Maybe somewhere, someone had lived quietly for decades while the entire country searched for him. That idea fascinated investigators and the public alike. Because if Cooper survived, then the greatest unsolved hijacking in American history was not a tragedy. It was the perfect escape. A man who planned every detail. A man who defeated the FBI. A man who vanished under a false name and lived a secret life. The possibility was almost irresistible. But investigators still needed answers. The FBI compared the recovered money with the original evidence. The bills matched. The serial numbers were confirmed. There was no doubt. The money had come from the hijacking. But the discovery raised a deeper question. Why there? The area around Tina Bar became the center of new searches. Agents returned. Volunteers searched. Researchers examined the landscape. Every inch of ground became a potential clue. Perhaps the missing parachute was nearby. Perhaps Cooper's remains were hidden underground. Perhaps more money remained buried. But once again, the wilderness offered nothing. No parachute. No clothing. No human remains. No additional ransom. Only those 3 bundles. It was as if the mystery had allowed investigators to glimpse the truth for a moment and then disappeared again. The FBI studied the recovered money for years. Experts examined the condition of the bills. They analyzed the dirt and debris. They looked for signs that could reveal how long the money had been buried. But the evidence refused to provide a definitive answer. The Cooper case had entered a new phase. The question was no longer simply, who was he? Now there were even more questions. Where did he land? Did he survive? Who helped him? Where did the rest of the money go? Was the man behind the name DB Cooper still alive? Every answer created another mystery. And as investigators searched for the truth, the list of suspects continued to expand. Men from different backgrounds, former soldiers, aviation workers, criminals, ordinary citizens with extraordinary secrets. Each one carried a possibility. Each one represented a different version of the same mystery. But among all the suspects, one name would eventually become one of the most discussed theories in the entire investigation. A man whose life appeared to match the clues. A man whose past included parachuting experience. A man whose connection to aviation made investigators wonder whether they had finally found the person behind the legend. His name would become one of the most famous in the Cooper investigation. But like every suspect before him, the evidence would never be enough to close the case. For years after the discovery at Tina Bar, the DB Cooper investigation existed in a state of permanent uncertainty. The recovered ransom money proved that at least part of Cooper's escape had left a physical trace. But it did not reveal the most important answer. The identity of the man who walked onto Northwest Orient Flight 305 remained hidden. The FBI had spent years examining thousands of possibilities. Every lead created hope. Every suspect created headlines. But every theory eventually reached the same dead end. The mystery survived because Cooper had left behind the perfect combination of evidence and absence. There was enough evidence to prove the crime happened, but not enough evidence to prove who committed it. Then, as investigators continued searching, one suspect began attracting unusual attention. His name was Kenneth Peter Christensen. To some people, he looked like the man who had disappeared into the storm. To others, he was simply another false lead in a case full of them. But the details surrounding his life created one of the most persistent theories in the entire Cooper mystery. Kenneth Christensen was born in Minnesota in 1926. During World War II, he served in the United States Army. He trained as a paratrooper. That detail immediately caught investigators' attention. D.B. Cooper had jumped from an aircraft. He had selected parachutes. He had understood the mechanics of the Boeing 727's rear staircase. Military parachuting experience would have explained some of his confidence. But that was only the beginning. After his military service, Christensen entered the aviation world. He worked for Northwest Orient Airlines, the same airline involved in the hijacking. He knew aircraft. He knew procedures. He knew how airlines operated. The connection seemed almost too perfect. A former paratrooper, a Northwest employee, a man familiar with the Boeing 727, a person who understood exactly how vulnerable the airline system was in 1971. The theory gained even more attention because of changes people noticed in Christensen's life after the hijacking. According to those who knew him, he suddenly appeared to have more money than expected. He purchased property. He made unusual financial moves. Some acquaintances claimed he possessed a large amount of cash. Others said his personality had changed. He became quieter, more secretive. For investigators and Cooper researchers, those details created suspicion. But suspicion was not proof. The FBI examined Christensen. They compared his appearance with the famous composite sketch. Some people believed there were similarities. Others argued the differences were significant. The sketch showed a man with a sharper face and a stronger build. Christensen was shorter and had different physical characteristics. Age was another issue. Depending on when witnesses estimated Cooper's age, Christensen either fit or did not. Like many Cooper suspects, the evidence depended heavily on interpretation. The most interesting clues were the ones that could not be explained. One story came from Christensen's brother, Lyle. Years after the hijacking, Kenneth reportedly made comments that caused suspicion. According to accounts from family members, he hinted that he knew more about the Cooper case than he admitted. The details of those conversations became part of the legend surrounding him. But again, nothing could be independently confirmed. No confession. No ransom money. No physical evidence. No direct link to the airplane. The FBI investigated dozens of suspects with similar connections. Christensen became famous because his story was compelling. But compelling stories do not solve crimes. The case required evidence. And evidence remained missing. The problem was always the same. Cooper had planned his escape carefully, but perhaps not perfectly. If he survived, he was smart enough to hide. If he died, the wilderness was large enough to conceal him. Either possibility prevented investigators from reaching a conclusion. As the years passed, the FBI continued receiving tips. Some came from credible sources. Others were impossible. People claimed to recognize Cooper in old photographs. They identified strangers at airports. They reported neighbors who suddenly owned expensive items. They contacted authorities with stories that sounded convincing. But almost every lead collapsed under examination. The case became a magnet for speculation. A person could look at the same evidence and reach completely different conclusions. One investigator saw a professional criminal. Another saw a desperate man taking a final gamble. One believed Cooper was a skilled parachutist. Another believed he was an amateur who simply got lucky. One believed he survived. Another believed he died within minutes of leaving the aircraft. The uncertainty became the defining feature of the case. Meanwhile, aviation security changed dramatically because of incidents like Cooper's hijacking. Before 1971, airline travel was a different world. Passengers could board planes with minimal screening. Security procedures were limited. Hijackings had become increasingly common during the late 1960s and early 1970s. But the Cooper case was different. It demonstrated a terrifying vulnerability. A single person could bring a commercial aircraft under control with little more than a believable threat. The consequences were immediate. Airports began introducing stronger security measures. Passenger screening expanded. Rules changed. The age of casual airline travel began disappearing. Ironically, DB. Cooper's success helped create the modern airport security system. The man who exposed a weakness in aviation security also helped close that weakness forever. But while the world changed around him, Cooper remained frozen in time. A photograph. A sketch. A name. A mystery. Decades after the hijacking, people still debated whether he was a criminal mastermind or a reckless gambler. Some viewed him as a villain who endangered innocent people. Others saw him as a symbol of a different era, when impossible escapes still seemed possible. But behind the fascination was a serious, unresolved crime. A man had threatened an aircraft. A ransom had disappeared. A person's true identity remained unknown. And somewhere hidden among the thousands of pages of investigation files, there were still clues waiting to be understood. The FBI never officially closed the case. The question remained open. Who was D.B. Cooper? And perhaps even more haunting, What happened during the final moments after he stepped onto the rear staircase of Flight 305? Because that was the moment where history divided. One possibility led into the darkness of the forest. A parachute failing. A body never found. A mystery created by death. The other possibility led somewhere even more extraordinary. A man landing safely. Walking away. Removing the parachute. Hiding the money. And spending the rest of his life knowing that millions of people were searching for him. For more than 50 years, the world has searched for the answer. But the man who called himself Dan Cooper remains one of the most famous ghosts in American criminal history. And the storm that swallowed him still refuses to reveal what happened that night. The longer the D.B. Cooper investigation continued, the more the case began to transform from a criminal investigation into an international obsession. A normal investigation follows a path. A crime occurs. Evidence is collected. Suspects are identified. A conclusion is eventually reached. But the Cooper case refused to follow that pattern. Every road led somewhere, and then stopped. Every clue opened another mystery. Every theory created another question. The man who called himself Dan Cooper had committed one of the most daring crimes in American history, yet he had somehow left behind almost nothing that could reveal his true identity. No fingerprints that could be conclusively matched. No confirmed photograph beyond eyewitness descriptions. No verifico de complice. No confession. No final message. Only a handful of objects abandoned inside an airplane. A clip-on tie. A few cigarette butts. A ransom that vanished. And a legend that grew larger every year. As the decades passed, investigators began examining a different possibility. Maybe Cooper was not a professional criminal. Maybe he was simply someone who knew enough. The original image of Cooper as a highly trained expert began to change. Some researchers argued that his plan contained serious mistakes. A true expert parachutist would have known the danger of jumping into a storm at night. A professional would have chosen better equipment. A trained survivalist would not have entered the wilderness wearing a business suit and dress shoes. Perhaps Cooper was not a master criminal. Perhaps he was an ordinary man who believed he had nothing left to lose. This theory created an entirely different portrait. Not a genius. Not a criminal mastermind. But a desperate individual willing to attempt the impossible. The FBI explored both possibilities. They examined military records. They reviewed airline employee files. They investigated criminals with experience in explosives. They searched for people who had disappeared shortly after the hijacking. But every promising lead eventually collapsed. The biggest challenge remained the same. There was no confirmed identity. Without knowing who Cooper was, investigators could not understand his background. Without his background, they could not determine his abilities. And without knowing his abilities, they could not determine whether he survived. The case became a puzzle missing its most important piece. The man himself. Over the years, hundreds of people became suspects. Some were connected through aviation. Some through military service. Some through criminal history. Others simply matched the general description. But one group received particular attention. Former paratroopers. The logic was straightforward. Cooper had jumped from an airplane. Therefore, perhaps he knew how. The FBI examined records of former military personnel who disappeared around the time of the hijacking. They investigated veterans who had financial problems. They looked into individuals with parachuting experience. But the search produced no definitive answer. The problem was that parachuting alone did not identify Cooper. Thousands of people had military jump experience. Thousands understood aircraft. Thousands matched parts of the description. The challenge was finding someone who matched everything. The man had possessed aviation knowledge, parachuting knowledge, confidence under pressure, the ability to disappear, and somehow connect to the ransom money. No one fit perfectly. Then came another important clue: the aircraft itself, the Boeing 727. Investigators realized Cooper's choice of aircraft was not random. The 727 had a unique design feature: the rear staircase. Unlike many commercial aircraft, the 727 allowed the aft stairs to be lowered during flight. That feature made the plane attractive to hijackers. After Cooper's escape, airlines and manufacturers had to reconsider the vulnerability. Eventually, modifications were introduced to prevent similar escapes. The device became known as the Cooper vane. It automatically prevented the rear stairs from being lowered while the aircraft was airborne. The irony was striking. A man whose identity remained unknown had permanently changed aviation security. His name became attached to a piece of aircraft technology. A criminal act had created a safety innovation. But even with new security measures, the original mystery remained untouched. Where did Cooper go? The answer seemed buried somewhere beneath the forests of Washington. Search teams returned to the area multiple times. Some researchers created their own investigations. They studied weather conditions, flight paths, wind patterns, aircraft speed, possible landing zone. Modern technology allowed researchers to analyze the jump in ways impossible in 1971. Satellite imagery, computer modeling, geographic mapping. Every new analysis produced another theory. Some researchers argued Cooper likely landed much closer to civilization than originally believed. Others believed he entered one of the most remote areas of the region. Some suggested he may have landed in the Columbia River. Others believe he survived and escaped before authorities arrived. The debate continued because every scenario had weaknesses. If he survived, where did he go? How did he hide? How did he avoid spending the money? If he died, why were no remains discovered? How did the money reach Tina Bar? The mystery survived because no explanation answered every question. In the world of criminal investigations, there is usually a moment when the evidence becomes overwhelming. A fingerprint, a confession, a witness, a discovery. The Cooper case never reached that moment. Instead, it remained suspended between possibility and impossibility. And then, decades after the hijacking, another unexpected name entered the investigation. A man who had spent years insisting he was not Cooper. A man whose family believed differently. A man whose life story seemed to contain strange connections to the case. His name was Robert Dayton. But he was only one of many people who would claim to have knowledge of the truth. The Cooper mystery had entered a new era. The FBI was no longer the only group searching. Independent investigators, journalists, historians, and ordinary citizens began chasing their own theories. Everyone wanted to solve the impossible. Everyone wanted to be the person who finally revealed the identity behind the name. But every discovery created another layer of uncertainty. Because the greatest mystery was no longer just whether Cooper survived. The deeper question became something far more disturbing. How could a man vanish so completely in an age when information was everywhere? How could someone commit one of the most famous crimes in American history and leave the world knowing almost nothing about him? The answer remained hidden, somewhere between a storm-filled sky and a dark forest below, somewhere between a successful escape and a fatal mistake, somewhere between reality and legend. Cooper was still out there, not as a person, not as a suspect, but as a question that refused to disappear. More than a decade after the night skies swallowed D.B. Cooper, the case had already become something far greater than a criminal investigation. It had become an American mystery, A story passed from one generation to another. A story about a man who walked onto an airplane carrying a briefcase, threatened a bomb, collected a fortune, and vanished without leaving behind a clear answer. But behind the legend was a reality that investigators could never ignore. A dangerous crime had taken place. A commercial aircraft had been controlled by a stranger. Passengers and crew members had faced unimaginable uncertainty. And somewhere in the aftermath, a person responsible had disappeared. The FBI continued searching for truth, but by the 1980s and 1990s, the case had entered a difficult stage. The original witnesses were aging. Physical evidence was limited. Many possible suspects had already been investigated. The trail had grown cold. Yet the mystery refused to die. Every few years, a new theory would emerge. Every new theory created headlines. And every headline brought the name D.B. Cooper back into public attention. One of the most fascinating aspects of the case was the way different investigators interpreted the same evidence. To some, Cooper was clearly an experienced parachutist. They pointed to his calm behavior, his understanding of the aircraft, his ability to negotiate, his confidence while preparing for the jump. They believed no ordinary person would have attempted such an escape. But others saw something completely different. They believed Cooper was not an expert. They believed he was improvising. They pointed to his clothing, his lack of proper equipment, the dangerous weather, the fact that he jumped into unknown terrain. Perhaps he was not a professional at all. Perhaps he was simply a man making one desperate attempt. This debate became central to the mystery because the answer determined everything. If Cooper was highly skilled, survival became more likely. If Cooper was inexperienced, the jump may have been fatal. The FBI examined the physical evidence left behind. The famous tie became one of the most important clues. Investigators discovered that the tie contained traces of material that suggested Cooper may have worked in an environment involving machinery or engineering. For a time, some researchers believed this pointed toward a connection with aviation or manufacturing. But the evidence was never enough. A tie could have been worn by thousands of people. A workplace connection did not prove involvement. Once again, the clue created possibilities without providing answers. The cigarette butts found on the aircraft were also examined. At one point, investigators hoped DNA technology might finally reveal Cooper's identity. But the evidence was incomplete. The samples had been handled repeatedly. Testing methods from earlier decades had damaged their usefulness. Modern science could solve many old mysteries. But sometimes the evidence itself had already been lost to time. The Cooper case became a battle between technology and absence. New tools appeared. But the crucial evidence was missing. No complete DNA profile. No clear fingerprints. No recovered parachute. No confirmed remains. No reliable witness after the aircraft landed. The man had left the scene before investigators even knew where to look. Another major question involved the ransom money. If Cooper survived, what happened to the cash? $200,000 in 1971 was a fortune. Adjusted for inflation, it represented well over $1 million in modern value. A person could not simply spend that amount without attracting attention. Banks monitored unusual transactions. Law enforcement watched for the serial numbers. The media followed every possible discovery. Yet the money never appeared. Only the Tina Bar discovery. Just $5,800. Nothing more. This created one of the strangest elements of the case. If Cooper survived, why did he never use a ransom? If he died, how did part of the money travel to the riverbank? The missing cash became almost as mysterious as the missing man. Some researchers propose that Cooper may have buried the money and planned to recover it later. Perhaps he survived the jump but lost the location. Perhaps he died before returning. Others suggested an accomplice waited nearby. Someone who helped him escape. Someone who collected the money afterward. But there was no evidence of another person. No witness reported seeing a vehicle. No one admitted involvement. No second suspect ever emerged. The possibility of an accomplice remained only a theory. Meanwhile, the public fascination continued. Books were published. Television programs investigated the case. Amateur detectives created detailed theories. Some spent years studying weather reports and flight paths. Others searched forests with metal detectors, hoping to find a buried parachute or forgotten evidence. The Cooper mystery attracted people because it seemed solvable. The clues existed. The timeline was known. The crime was documented. Unlike many cold cases, this one did not disappear in complete uncertainty. Everyone knew the exact moment when Cooper entered the aircraft. Everyone knew what he demanded. Everyone knew how he escaped. The only missing moment was the most important one. What happened after the jump? That single unanswered question carried the entire mystery. As the years passed, new suspects continued to appear. One of the most notable was a man named Richard Floyd McCoy. His name became connected to the case because of similarities between his crimes and Cooper's hijacking. McCoy was a Vietnam War veteran. He had military experience. He had parachuting skills. And months after the Cooper hijacking, he carried out a similar aircraft hijacking involving a ransom demand and parachute escape. The similarities were remarkable. Another hijacker, another aircraft, another parachute, another attempt to escape through the sky. For many researchers, McCoy seemed like a possible answer. Could he have been Cooper? The timing created problems. The FBI investigated the possibility. But McCoy's appearance did not match witness descriptions closely enough. His known movements also created difficulties. He was eventually captured after his own hijacking. He was not the mysterious figure who vanished into the Washington wilderness. Still, the connection demonstrated something important. DB. Cooper's method was not impossible. Someone else had attempted a similar escape. Someone else had understood the same basic idea. The difference was that McCoy was caught. Cooper was not. That contrast only made the original mystery more fascinating. One man jumped. One man disappeared. And decades later, the world still did not know his name. The investigation continued moving through different generations. The agents who originally chased Cooper retired. New investigators inherited the files. The world changed around the case. Computers replaced paper files. DNA technology transformed criminal investigations. Satellite images mapped landscapes that once seemed impossible to search. But the Cooper mystery remained trapped in 1971. A rainy night. A Boeing 727. A stranger in a suit. A staircase opening into darkness. And a question that had survived for more than half a century. Did D.B. Cooper land safely? Or did the storm claim him before he ever touched the ground? No one knew. And perhaps the most terrifying possibility was that somewhere, someone did know. Someone who had seen the man before he became a legend. Someone who knew the real name behind the fake one. Someone who knew whether the greatest disappearing act in American criminal history was a masterpiece of planning, or a final act of desperation. For more than 50 years, the mystery of D.B. Cooper has survived because it exists in a place where certainty disappears. Every clue has two possible meanings. Every theory has a weakness. Every answer creates another question. The case remains one of the rare criminal mysteries where the truth feels close enough to touch, yet impossible to reach. The world knows the story, but the world does not know the man. On the evening of November 24th, 1971, a stranger entered Portland International Airport carrying a briefcase. He purchased a one-way ticket under the name Dan Cooper. He sat quietly among ordinary passengers. He ordered a drink. He waited. Then, in a matter of seconds, he transformed from an invisible traveler into the center of a national emergency. But the most remarkable part of the story was not the hijacking itself. It was what happened afterward. The disappearance. The complete absence. A criminal had committed a major federal offense and somehow removed himself from history. As the investigation entered the 21st century, the FBI continued receiving information about possible suspects. Many names became famous among Cooper researchers. Some were supported by interesting details. Some were based on coincidence. Some were built almost entirely on speculation. But every suspect faced the same impossible standard. Could they be connected to the airplane? Could they be connected to the ransom? Could they explain the knowledge Cooper displayed? Could they explain the disappearance? Most could answer one or two questions. None could answer them all. One of the most persistent theories involved a man named Dwayne Weber. For years, Weber's widow claimed that her husband confessed on his deathbed. According to her, he told her, "I am Dan Cooper." The statement immediately attracted attention. A dying confession from a person who claimed responsibility for one of America's greatest mysteries sounded like the breakthrough investigators had waited decades to find. Weber's background also created curiosity. He had a criminal history. He had served time in prison. He had knowledge of the Pacific Northwest. He matched some general descriptions. But once again, the evidence was incomplete. No verified ransom money. No physical connection to the aircraft. No proof that his confession was genuine. The case returned to its familiar pattern. A fascinating possibility, but not a solution. Another suspect who gained significant attention was Robert B. Rackstraw. Rackstraw was a former Army pilot and Vietnam War veteran. His military background made him attractive to Cooper researchers. He understood aircraft. He had parachuting experience. He possessed skills that seemed consistent with a hijacking. Supporters of the theory pointed to similarities between Rackstraw and the FBI sketch. They studied his statements. They examined his history. They searched for hidden connections. For years, some people believed Rackstraw was the strongest candidate ever identified. But the FBI investigated him and never publicly confirmed him as Cooper. Rackstraw denied being involved. No physical evidence linked him to the crime. Again, the mystery remained. The Cooper case had created a strange phenomenon. The absence of proof allowed theories to survive. Because no one could definitively prove a suspect was not Cooper. But no one could prove they were. The unknown identity became a blank space where countless possibilities could exist. That was the power of the mystery. Anyone could become Cooper, a quiet neighbor, a former soldier, a businessman, a pilot, a stranger who suddenly disappeared from public life. The legend allowed imagination to fill the gaps, but investigators had to work differently. They needed facts, and facts were limited. The FBI officially suspended active investigation into the Cooper case in 2016 after more than 4 decades of work. The decision did not mean the mystery was solved. It meant that available resources had been exhausted. The Bureau continued to preserve evidence and would still consider credible new information. But the intensive search ended. After 45 years, the government investigation had reached the same conclusion that independent researchers had reached. The answer was somewhere, but it remained hidden. The closing of the active investigation created another wave of interest. For some, it felt like the end of an era. For others, it was proof that the mystery had become larger than the investigation itself. D.B. Cooper had become a symbol of the unknown, a case that represented the limits of human knowledge. Even modern technology had failed to uncover the truth. And perhaps that was what made the story so powerful. In an age where digital footprints follow people everywhere, where cameras record almost every movement, where information can travel around the world instantly, Cooper belonged to a different time. A time when a person could disappear. A time when a handwritten note could create a national crisis. A time when someone could walk into an airport as a stranger and leave behind a mystery that lasted generations. The question of survival remained the heart of the case. Many experts still debate it. Some believe Cooper died during the jump. They point to the impossible conditions: the storm, the darkness, the lack of proper equipment, the difficult terrain. They argue that survival would have required extraordinary luck. Others believe Cooper survived. They argue that the absence of remains proves nothing. The wilderness is vast. Bodies can remain hidden for decades. A skilled individual could disappear if properly prepared. They point to Cooper's calm behavior, his aircraft knowledge, his careful demands. They believe he knew exactly what he was doing. The truth may never be known, and that uncertainty is what keeps the case alive, because every scenario leaves behind a haunting image. If Cooper died that night, somewhere beneath the forests of Washington may lie the remains of the man who became a legend, a forgotten grave without a name, a final resting place that no one has discovered. But if Cooper survived, then somewhere in America's history there may have been a person who carried an incredible secret for decades. A person who woke up every morning knowing millions of people had searched for him. A person who watched documentaries about himself, read newspapers about himself, listened as strangers debated his identity, and never spoke. That possibility is almost impossible to ignore. The idea that the greatest unsolved hijacking in American history may have been solved by one person alone, the man himself, a man who simply chose silence. As the years continued, researchers returned again and again to the same pieces of evidence: the tie, the money, the parachutes, the flight path, the eyewitness accounts. Each one contained a fragment of the truth, but the complete picture remained missing. The final chapter had never been written. And perhaps the most mysterious part of all was that Cooper did not need to disappear forever to win. He only needed to disappear long enough to escape, long enough to hide, long enough for the world to stop looking. More than 5 decades later, his name still appears in headlines. His story is still investigated. His identity is still debated. The FBI's greatest aviation mystery remains open in the minds of millions, because somewhere between the moment he stepped onto the aircraft and the moment he vanished into clouds, there was a truth that has remained hidden through decades of searching, a truth that may never be recovered. The man called D.B. Cooper entered history as a criminal, but he left it as something far more unusual, a mystery. The story of D.B. Cooper should have ended on the night of November 24th, 1971. A plane lands. A suspect escapes. Investigators search. A case is eventually closed. That is how most criminal investigations unfold. But the Cooper case refused to follow the rules. Instead of fading away, it grew. Instead of being forgotten, it became more famous. The unanswered questions became more powerful than the crime itself. The man who called himself Dan Cooper had created a mystery that survived generations, technologies, and countless investigations. But as the decades passed, one question continued to dominate every discussion. Was D.B. Cooper a criminal mastermind who successfully escaped? Or was he a man who made one final, impossible mistake? The answer depended on how investigators interpreted the evidence left behind. The jump itself remained the center of the debate. At approximately 8:13 p.m., Flight 305 experienced a sudden change in altitude. The pilots noticed the movement. The aircraft reacted differently. Something had happened near the rear staircase. Investigators believed this was the moment Cooper jumped. But after that moment, there was only darkness. No witnesses. No radio communication. No confirmed sighting. The entire fate of D.B. Cooper existed within a few seconds of uncertainty. The FBI attempted to reconstruct those final moments. They analyzed the aircraft speed, the altitude, the weather, the estimated location. They studied wind patterns from that night. They calculated possible landing zones. But every calculation produced a wide range of possibilities. The Pacific Northwest was not a forgiving environment. The forests were thick. The terrain was unpredictable. The rivers were dangerous. A person could disappear there without leaving obvious evidence. Even today, hikers and search teams occasionally discover objects lost decades earlier in remote areas. Time does not always reveal secrets. Sometimes it protects them. The possibility that Cooper survived became stronger for some researchers because of one simple fact. No one had ever found him. No confirmed remains. No identifiable clothing. No parachute. No equipment. Nothing. For many investigators, the absence of evidence was not proof of survival. But for others, it was impossible to ignore. How could a person vanish completely? If Cooper had died, where was the evidence? If he survived, where was the proof? The mystery existed because both possibilities remained alive. The recovered money at Tina Bar only deepened the uncertainty. The discovery proved the ransom had entered the environment, but it did not explain how. Some experts believe the money could have been carried by natural forces. Perhaps the bundles traveled through the Columbia River system. Perhaps they moved underground. Perhaps they remained hidden for years before appearing. Others questioned whether that explanation fully made sense. Why only 3 bundles? Why only part of the ransom? Why in that exact location? The money was a clue, but it was also another mystery. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Cooper case was the personality of the man himself. Every witness described the same unusual behavior. Calm. Controlled. Polite. He never appeared overwhelmed. Even when surrounded by danger, he remained composed. He treated the hijacking almost like a business transaction. That detail has fascinated investigators for decades. Fear often reveals people. Under pressure, people make mistakes. They panic. They change their stories. They lose control. Cooper did not. He appeared prepared. He knew what he wanted. He knew how to communicate his demands. He understood how to manipulate the situation. This suggested experience. But experience in what? Was he military? Was he aviation trained? Was he a criminal? Or was he simply someone who had studied enough information to create a convincing plan? That question remains unanswered. The FBI reviewed countless possibilities. They investigated former military personnel. They examined aviation employees. They questioned people with criminal backgrounds. They followed tips from across the United States. Some suspects seemed promising. Some had unusual connections. Some had strange financial activity. Some made suspicious comments years later. But the same problem always appeared. There was never enough. A theory requires evidence. A suspicion requires proof. And the Cooper case existed in the space between those two things. Over time, independent researchers became increasingly involved. The internet changed the investigation. People from around the world could access information. They analyzed old documents. They studied flight paths. They compared photographs. They built their own theories. Some researchers believe the FBI focused too heavily on certain assumptions. Others believed investigators missed important clues. The case became a collaboration between professionals and amateurs. Everyone was searching for the same answer. Who was D.B. Cooper? But perhaps the greatest mystery was not his identity. It was his motivation. Why did he do it? The ransom amount was significant. But Cooper did not demand millions. He did not seek political attention. He did not attempt to embarrass the government. He simply wanted money. A quiet escape. A disappearance. This made him different from many other hijackers. He was not trying to start a movement. He was not trying to become famous. Ironically, his attempt to remain anonymous made him one of the most famous criminals in history. He wanted to disappear. Instead, he became unforgettable. His name entered popular culture. References appeared in movies, television programs, books, and music. The phrase D.B. Cooper became shorthand for impossible escape. But behind the entertainment was a real, unanswered case. A real aircraft. Real passengers. Real fear. Real investigators who spent years searching for a man who may have been hiding in plain sight. The passage of time created another challenge. People who knew Cooper, if they existed, grew older. Memories faded. Documents disappeared. Witnesses died. Every year reduced the possibility of learning the truth. But every year also added another layer to the legend, because mystery becomes stronger when time cannot defeat it. The Cooper case survived because it represented something rare. A person had challenged the system, and the system had failed to find him. For law enforcement, it was a frustrating reminder that even the largest investigations have limits. For the public, it became a story about possibility, a story about whether one person could truly vanish. The answer remained unknown, but the evidence suggested something extraordinary had happened. Either a man survived one of the most dangerous jumps imaginable, or the wilderness had hidden one of the greatest secrets in criminal history. And somewhere between those two possibilities was a truth that investigators had chased for more than 50 years. A truth that continued to wait beneath the forest, inside forgotten memories, and within the remaining pages of the FBI files. The name D.B. Cooper remained. The question remained. And the mystery remained. For more than half a century, the name D.B. Cooper has remained suspended between fact and legend. He was a real man, a real criminal, a real passenger on a real airplane. But the person behind the name remains unknown. No confirmed identity. No final confession. No grave. No definitive ending. The mystery that began on a cold November night in 1971 has survived longer than anyone could have imagined. And perhaps the most remarkable part is that the world still does not know whether Cooper escaped into a new life, or disappeared forever beneath the darkness of the Pacific Northwest. The final moments of the hijacking remain frozen in time. A Boeing 727 flying through a storm. A rear staircase lowered into the night. A man carrying a fortune in stolen cash. A parachute disappearing into clouds. Then silence. That silence became the foundation of the legend. Because everything before the jump was documented. Everything after the jump was unknown. The world witnessed the beginning, but no one witnessed the end. The FBI spent decades attempting to bridge that gap. Agents followed thousands of leads. They interviewed countless witnesses. They examined evidence. They studied suspects. They searched forests. They analyzed aircraft data. They investigated every possibility that could explain what happened after Cooper stepped away from the plane. But the case remained exactly where it had started. A mystery. The recovered money from Tina Barr remains one of the most important pieces of evidence. It proves that the ransom entered the environment. It proves that at least part of Cooper's escape continued beyond the aircraft. But it does not reveal the final answer. The money does not identify him. It does not prove survival. It does not prove death. It simply confirms that something happened after the jump. Something investigators have never fully understood. Over the years, countless theories have attempted to solve the case. Some suggest Cooper was an experienced military parachutist who executed a carefully planned escape. Others argue he was an ordinary man who underestimated the danger and paid the ultimate price. Some believe he lived quietly under another name. Others believe his remains may still be hidden somewhere in the wilderness. Each theory carries pieces of the truth, but none carries all of it. That is why the case remains alive. Because the answer is never completely impossible. There is always another possibility. Another forgotten clue. Another person who may know something. Another piece of evidence waiting to be discovered. The D.B. Cooper mystery also changed the world beyond the investigation. His hijacking exposed weaknesses in airline security. Before 1971, air travel existed in a different era. Passengers moved freely. Security procedures were minimal. Trust was the foundation of commercial aviation. Cooper's crime showed how vulnerable the system could be. Afterward, airports transformed. Security became stricter. Passenger screening expanded. Aircraft designs changed. The rear staircase on Boeing's 727 aircraft was modified with technology known as the Cooper vane, preventing similar mid-air escapes. In a strange twist of history, the man who exploited a weakness in aviation helped create a safer future for millions of travelers. His crime changed the industry forever. Yet his identity remained untouched. That contradiction is what makes the case so unforgettable. A man who left behind so much evidence somehow left behind almost no answers. A man who created a national emergency became a person nobody truly knew. Even today, researchers continue examining old documents and forgotten details. New theories appear. Old suspects return. Modern technology offers new possibilities. DNA analysis, digital archives, and advanced mapping tools have changed how investigators approach cold cases. But technology can only analyze what remains. And in the Cooper case, the most important evidence has always been missing. The man himself. Perhaps someone knows the truth. Perhaps someone has always known. Maybe a family member discovered a secret years ago. Maybe an old friend recognized the story, but remained silent. Maybe Cooper carried the truth with him to the end. That possibility creates one of the most haunting images in the entire mystery. A man living an ordinary life while the world searched for him. A man walking through crowded streets, buying groceries, talking with neighbors, watching news reports about himself, knowing that the greatest secret in American criminal history belonged only to him. If that happened, then Cooper achieved exactly what he wanted. He disappeared. Not just from the authorities, but from history itself. But if he died that night, another image emerges. A lonely figure lost in the wilderness. A parachute buried beneath trees. A ransom hidden somewhere beneath the earth. A final mystery created not by success, but by failure. Both possibilities are equally haunting, and that may be why D.B. Cooper continues to fascinate the world, The case is not only about a crime. It is about uncertainty. It is about the limits of investigation. It is about the human desire to know the truth. For decades, people have searched for answers because a story feels incomplete, a beginning without an ending, a crime without a conclusion, a man without an identity. The FBI may have closed its active investigation, but the mystery itself remains open. The files still exist. The evidence still exists. The questions still exist. And somewhere in the endless space between what is known and what is unknown lies the truth about the man who walked into an airport, boarded a plane, and changed criminal history forever. On that Thanksgiving Eve in 1971, a stranger named Dan Cooper sat quietly among ordinary passengers. He looked like anyone else. He spoke politely. He caused no immediate suspicion. Then, within hours, he became the most famous unidentified criminal in America. He vanished into the night, and he took his identity with him. Today, the world still knows him only by a name that was never even his. D.B. Cooper. A name created by mistake. A name attached to a mystery. A name that represents one of the greatest unanswered questions in FBI history. More than 50 years later, the storm has passed. The airplane is long gone. The investigation has slowed. The witnesses have aged. But the mystery remains exactly where it has always been. Somewhere between the sky and the ground. Somewhere between survival and disappearance. Somewhere between reality and legend. The man who jumped from Flight 305 was never found. His name was never confirmed. His story was never finished. And perhaps that is a reason B. Cooper remains unforgettable. Because after all these years, the greatest mystery is not how he escaped. The greatest mystery is who he really was. More than 5 decades have passed since a man calling himself Dan Cooper walked onto Northwest Orient Flight 305 and created a mystery that time itself has failed to solve. The world has changed dramatically since that night. The technology that once seemed impossible now exists in everyday life. Satellites can photograph remote landscapes. Computers can analyze millions of records in seconds. DNA can identify people from microscopic traces left behind decades earlier. Yet one question from 1971 remains untouched. Who was D.B. Cooper? The mystery has survived not because there are no clues. It has survived because every clue leads to a different possibility. The tie, the ransom money, the parachutes, the aircraft, the witnesses. All of these pieces exist, but they refuse to form a complete picture. And perhaps that is what makes the Cooper case unlike any other. It is not a mystery built on a lack of information. It is a mystery built on information that cannot agree. For modern investigators, the challenge is no longer simply finding new evidence. It is understanding old evidence in a new way. Every generation returns to the same night, November 24th, 1971. A Boeing 727 disappears into the darkness above Washington State. A man opens a rear staircase. A parachute enters the storm, and history loses track of him forever. In recent years, independent researchers have continued examining the case using tools unavailable to the original FBI investigators. They have recreated flight paths. They have studied weather conditions. They have analyzed terrain. They have questioned whether the original search area was correct. Because if the estimated jump location was wrong, then every search that followed may have been looking in the wrong place. That possibility changes everything. The Pacific Northwest is enormous. A difference of only a few miles could mean the difference between a populated area and hundreds of square miles of wilderness. A small error in calculation could hide the truth forever. The question became, Was the FBI searching for Cooper, or searching for a mistake? Some researchers believe the original assumptions about the jump were too limited. They argue that wind, aircraft movement, and altitude calculations may have placed Cooper somewhere far from the area investigators originally believed. Others believe the original analysis remains the most likely explanation. The debate continues, but the uncertainty keeps the case alive. The possibility that evidence remains hidden somewhere has never disappeared. Over the years, people searching for Cooper have discovered strange objects throughout the Pacific Northwest. Pieces of old equipment, fragments of clothing, items buried beneath decades of soil. Most discoveries turned out to have nothing to do with the hijacking. But every discovery created a moment of possibility. For a brief moment, investigators and researchers imagined that the impossible mystery might finally have an answer. Then the evidence was examined, and the hope disappeared. That cycle has repeated for decades. Discovery, excitement, investigation, disappointment. But the search continues because the alternative is accepting that the truth may be permanently lost. The Cooper case represents something rare. A crime where the suspect became almost invisible. In most investigations, law enforcement works backward from the person. They identify the suspect. They study the motive. They reconstruct the crime. With Cooper, investigators were forced to work backward from almost nothing. They had the crime. They had the method. They had the escape. But they did not have the person. The identity was the missing foundation. Without it, every theory remained incomplete. One of the most fascinating possibilities is that Cooper may not have been hiding at all. Perhaps he did not spend his life running. Perhaps he simply returned to normal existence. A man with a secret. A man who never confessed. A man who carried the memory of one extraordinary night into his final days. If that happened, then the greatest escape in American history was not only physical. It was psychological. Cooper escaped because he convinced the world that he no longer existed. He became a person without a past. A mystery without an answer. A story without an ending. But there is another possibility. Perhaps the truth was lost because Cooper never survived. Perhaps the legend exists because the wilderness protected the secret. Perhaps somewhere beneath the forests of Washington lies the final evidence. A parachute. A piece of clothing. A forgotten object. Something that could finally reveal what happened. The most frustrating part of the case is that both possibilities remain believable. A successful escape. Or a fatal mistake. A genius plan. Or a desperate gamble. A man who lived beyond the mystery. Or a man who became the mystery itself. That uncertainty is what has kept D.B. Cooper alive in public memory. Because people are fascinated by impossible questions. They want to know where the line exists between courage and recklessness. Between intelligence and luck. Between disappearance and survival. The Cooper case sits exactly on that line. It represents a moment when one person challenged the most powerful institutions in America and created a mystery that even decades of investigation could not solve. The FBI searched. Researchers searched. The public searched. But the answer remained hidden. And perhaps the final lesson of D.B. Cooper is not about the man himself. Perhaps it is about the mystery he left behind. A reminder that despite all technology, all intelligence, and all human effort, some questions remain unanswered. Some stories remain unfinished. Some shadows remain impossible to identify. On a rainy night in 1971, a man stepped into the darkness. He carried a parachute. He carried stolen money. He carried a secret, and when he disappeared, he took that secret with him. The world has spent more than 50 years searching for D.B. Cooper. Maybe the greatest mystery was never where he went. Maybe the greatest mystery was how a man with no confirmed name became one of the most unforgettable figures in criminal history. Because in the end, D.B., Cooper is not only the man who vanished. He is the question that never stopped being asked.